All right, well, good morning. Today we're going to look at Romans chapter 3. Romans chapter 1 was about the need for righteousness for the Gentiles. Romans chapter 2 was how the Jews needed righteousness and how they were unrighteous before God. Romans chapter 3, beginning in verse 9, we're going to look at how there's a universal need for righteousness, that there's nobody that's righteous. Look at Romans chapter 3 and verse 9. The Bible says, "What then? Are we better than they, the Roman Christians? Not at all. We've all previously charged both Jews and Greeks, and they are under sin. But as it is written, there's none righteous, no, not one." Look how universal it is. None righteous, not one. None who understands. None who seeks after God. All are turned aside. They are altogether unprofitable. There is none who does good, not one. God looks at humanity and says, none of you meet my standard of righteousness. Let's look at these words he uses here. None who understands. In other words, nobody really understands even the requirement of God, much less God himself. We don't get it. Apart from a regenerate mind, we don't understand. And it's not that we couldn't, unfortunately. It's that we don't want to. It's not because there wasn't opportunities. We didn't choose to. There is none who seeks after God. This is huge. No one's really seeking God. You know, you look at these religions and you say, oh, it's so sad. You know, 1 billion people involved in Islam or going to hell. Religion is man's way of avoiding God. Not seeking God, but avoiding Him. They've all turned aside. All turned aside. See, when they were going after idols, by the way, they weren't seeking God. They were turning away from God. Same with these false religions. Turning aside has the idea of a soldier running the opposite direction. They say, charge! And the soldier goes the other way. See, that's what we do when God reaches out for us. Sometimes I'll reach out and say, come here, Riley, come here, Riley. And she goes, we do that very same thing to God. Their throat is an open tomb. Okay? The tombs were sealed back in that day because they didn't want people to see the rotting flesh or much less smell it. This has the idea of the throat being an open tomb. You can smell the decay and the rottenness of the heart by listening to the words that come out of it. Verse 17, the way of peace they haven't known. In other words, we're not a peaceful people. We're a people of conflict and fighting and war because that's what's in our heart. And then he sums it all up in verse 18. There is no fear of God before them. They don't understand God at all. In other words, we don't have an awe and respect for His greatness and His power. And we don't have a dread of violating His commands. We're just like, no big deal. We don't understand God. In 19 and 20, he basically sums up chapters 1, 2, and 3, and sums up the law by saying this. He says, now to those who are under the law, now whatever the law says, it says to those who are under the law, okay, which was everybody at the time before Jesus, it says, that every mouth may be stopped and the world may become guilty before God. The law says, do this, 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 and this, and you'll be justified before God. Why does it say that? So that we'll understand we don't make it. I'm not righteous. It will stop our mouths. By the way, we are not under law anymore. We're under grace. Verse 20. Therefore, by the deeds of the law shall no flesh be justified. No one's going to be in heaven saying, look what I did. I fulfilled the law. Not one single person will be in heaven saying that. The law is our tutor to bring us to verse 21. But now, everything changes in Romans. It's a shift. But now we're going to look at the source of righteousness. We've been looking at the need for righteousness in 1, 2, and 3. Now the source of it, the righteousness of God, the source of it, apart from the law, is being revealed, being witnessed by the law and the prophets. In other words, the law and the prophets said this was going to be coming. It wasn't like big surprise, although it was to everyone because they weren't really reading the law and the prophets correctly. But they did witness this. Even the righteousness of God through faith in Jesus to all and on all who believe. For there is no difference. All have sinned and fall short of the glory of God. Verse 24. being justified. The three important words we have to understand. Being justified freely through grace, through the redemption that is in Jesus, whom God set forth as a propitiation by His blood. Justified. What does that mean? Justification means declared righteous. This is a legal and a forensic term saying that we have been declared righteous. That means we have been pardoned from the guilt and the penalty of sin. It means that Christ's righteousness has been given to us. It was imputed to us. Redemption. This was a word used in slave trade. When you would see a slave there, they may have been a slave because they committed some crime, or maybe they just were a slave because they owed a debt. You go and you pay their debt, and they're redeemed from slavery. That's what Jesus did for us. He paid our sin debt and redeemed us. Propitiation. This is to appease the wrath. Propitiation means Jesus' death appeased the wrath of God for us. How does the chapter end? Verse 27. What then? Where is boasting? It's excluded. Why? Because the law of faith. Verse 28. In other words, no one's going to be in heaven boasting about what they did to get there. It's because of our faith in Jesus. They're given to you and to me completely and utterly apart from anything we could ever. And I didn't deserve one little bit of righteousness that Jesus gave us. We did nothing to get it. We fulfilled not one requirement of the law. It was given to us through faith in Jesus. Therefore, in verse 28, we are concluded that man is justified apart from the deeds of the law. Now, verse 31 sums up where the law is now. Do we then make void the law through faith? Certainly not. On the contrary, we establish the law. Now, what do you mean? How do we establish the law? Because God provided the payment for the law. What was the payment when you break the law? Death. Jesus' death. It justifies the law in that its original purpose to bring us to Christ as a tutor got fulfilled. And then third, and this is huge, because of Jesus' righteousness being imputed to us and us being pardoned and us having a new nature, we can now fulfill the law. We can now keep the law. Not that we're going to keep the law in every part, but we can actually do some things right because we have this new righteousness and this new righteousness in our lives. We're going to see over the next 2 days. Many times he uses this word justification in Romans. Most of it in the next 2. I was declared righteous before God. Wow. Righteous. You are declared righteous before God because of Jesus. Wow. Let that sink in. Let the love of Jesus and love of God sink in and change your life. We'll see you tomorrow.